Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I am focused on sharing stories and ideas from global experts on diversity and inclusion. My purpose is to share diverse stories so that you can learn from others' lived experiences and walk away with actionable strategies to lead even more inclusively. I share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together as allies. Welcome to this week's episode of the Next Pivot Point podcast. I am pleased to be joined by a fellow DEI practitioner, Chelsea Akers. She is a community connector passionate about finding innovative solutions to challenges, championing DE&I efforts, and improving workplace culture and employee well-being. She's the co-founder and current COO of Level D&I Solutions, a diversity and inclusion firm headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. Prior to co-founding Level, Chelsea volunteered as a national advisor and board member for Women in Technology International. Chelsea started her career with Fast Switch as an IT recruiter in January 2014 after earning her bachelor's degree in English language and literature from The Ohio State University. So welcome to the show, Chelsea.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Well, tell us your story. You spent some time in corporate before deciding to co-found your own diversity business. Curious how you made that leap and decision.
Yeah, so I came straight out of college, I went into IT staffing and had a couple different roles in that space, from recruiting to account management and sales. And just kind of every now and then we'd have a client say like, oh, we'd love to have more women on this team, or, we'd love more diversity here, but we just can't find it, or we don't know where to look. And then, on the side, I would go host these events for women in technology, specifically, in Columbus, and see all of these diverse women who are more than qualified for these types of roles, saying the same thing on their side, that they would love to get, into these organizations. And it was like, for some reason, there just wasn't a clear path for that from either side. So that was where my co-founder, Christina, and I kind of thought, like, there's a better way to do this. The current way that staffing companies are set up are not really diversity first. And that was something that we really wanted to address and change. And so that was when we kind of started to build our business plan, and figure out how we could really adjust the way that we were approaching not only staffing, but just the workforce in general, and making sure that companies were not only able to get more diverse talent in the door, but that they were able to retain them.
Well, that's such an important part, right? That's why there's the D for diversity and the I for inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
They go hand in hand. So, there's a lot of companies right now that want to hire diverse talent, right? And they're coming to you like, we just want to find them. We can't find them. So help us find them. And then you're right. Like, they're not going to stay if they don't feel included. They don't feel like their voice is heard. They don't see themselves reflected in the organization. Chelsea, I'm curious. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? So I'm sure you have clients that come to you that are very white male led, myself included for our clients. Most organizations look like that. So how do you, what's the communication like to a candidate that doesn't see themselves reflected in the organization yet, but the organization really is intentionally committed to diversity?
Yeah, I think kind of in my experience, what we really like to do is just tell the candidate, these are the steps that we've seen the organization take so far in their journey to try to improve DE&I internally. They recognize that there's an issue, whether it be with representation, or inclusion or diversity or whichever letter you want to assign it to. And they are working on it. But I'm always very upfront with candidates about where a company is currently. And I think today with social media, and all of that, it's pretty easy to kind of see what a company, where their stance is on a lot of these issues, whether they've made statements on recent events or whether they've made commitments to improve. And so I'm just always really upfront with them and say, they reached out to Level, they reached out to us because they want to put money toward this. Like it's not just lip service at this point, but this is where they are. And are you willing to be on that journey as they try to get where they want to be and where they should be?
Yeah, that's a really good. What kind of response do you get to that question from candidates?
I think it depends on the candidate and the company, but a lot of candidates recognize that this is a work in progress for most organizations, and that I would say really only fairly recently has DE&I really been like in the headlines for, kind of global news. I feel like before, in the, 10 years ago, it was more of just like a sideline kind of thing. Some companies did this, some people focused on this, but it wasn't this kind of global or national phenomenon like it is now. And so I think people are aware that it is a work in progress, that everyone is kind of on their own journey. And I think that they do appreciate when companies are, again, not just paying lip service, but actually putting money and effort toward making those improvements.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, when was the last time in recent history you've seen diversity stories about women, people of color, immigrants in the news for such a sustained period of time? And it's funny, I have kind of two camps of clients. I have the camp that's like, let this go away. I just want it to go back to normal, quote unquote, which like, good luck with that. And then the other camp that's like, this won't go away. We have to do something. And so those are the clients I prefer to work with, as I'm sure you do as well. I'm curious, Chelsea, especially, yourself being earlier in your career and knowing this next generation of talent is so diverse minded, right? So what do we know about Gen Z, the newest part of our workforce that's going to keep coming into the workforce? And what are their perceptions around diversity?
So that's a really interesting topic for me. And I'm actually hosting a talk later this month specifically around generational diversity and Gen Z. But the data and reports I've seen are mostly around differences in values that are really starkly contrasted between Gen Z and especially baby boomers in terms of like what they want out of their workplace, whether that be more flexibility to be remote or opportunities to get involved with employee resource groups, things that, maybe should or shouldn't be joked about. I think those are kind of the biggest pieces of data I've really seen around that generational diversity. But I am very excited. I have a lot of cousins who are younger than me in this Gen Z kind of space. And I feel like their engagement and involvement with social justice issues and their willingness, or I guess unwillingness, to just let things be as they are and just like kind of take it is really encouraging to me. I think, previous generations have been a little bit more willing to just say, this is kind of how things are and it sucks. And I wish that, women or, Black Americans or Asian Americans had, were treated better or, got more attention or whatever it is, felt safer in the workplace. But I think Gen Z is really here to say, like, yeah, that's how we used to do it, and we're just not going to let it be that way anymore. So I am very excited to see what that looks like as they really kind of come into the workplace and move up through different roles. I don't know that there's going to be the highest level of impact at these entry-level roles where a lot of that generation is right now. But as they kind of move up and climb the ladder, I'm just really excited to see how they push change.
Yeah. Well, I really like how you shared that juxtaposition of them versus baby boomers. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm on the fence between a Gen Xer and a millennial. And so I can relate. When I entered the workforce early 2000s, I was like, yep, go women, like go people of color. I naturally valued diversity. And it just kind of got sucked out of me. And I don't know how it happened, but over the course of the 12 years, I kind of just gave up. You heard so many disparaging comments and so many senior leaders that just didn't, it just wasn't on their radar. They didn't think it was even a problem. There was this apathy issue. Now, of course, because of recent events and because of, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and sustained social movements over time, I think organizations, like you said earlier, are realizing this isn't going to go away. And that's where Gen Z kind of fits a really nice timing perspective is there is a sense of urgency around this at the same time that this new generation that is the most diverse generation, I think they're
Mm-hmm.
barely majority white. I think the last statistic I saw was like 52%, I want to say, white.
Yeah.
So really interesting that shift. And one stat I find really interesting is that fastest growing demographic in the United States is biracial or
Yeah.
multiracial, probably better said. And so there's this mixing of our racial identities and
Mhm.
this value that they're perceiving around differences and belonging in the workplace for all
Mhm.
people. And it's a non negotiable. So it's kind of this perfect storm. I don't want to kick the can to this next generation to solve the problems that were created by others by any means.
Right, right.
Well, they need tools. They need to be empowered. And like you said, Chelsea, they're still going to be junior at an organization, which unfortunately you don't usually have that much of a voice and you don't get to influence
Mhm.
budgets and decisions as much. So I'm curious what this next generation, if we have someone listening that's a newer employee or somebody in their 20s that wants to make a difference, what kind of differences can you make as somebody that may not have the power and authority in an organization yet?
Yeah, I think that's always the hardest question, right? And I think it depends on the organization and how much freedom and mobility you have to move around in there. I think that something that we've started coaching organizations around is listening to their employees more, and especially their employee resource groups, because those people are really the ones that are, kind of boots on the ground, addressing and thinking about these specific issues faced by, whatever that demographic or group is. And so I think that finding out about what resources exist at the company you're at, getting involved again with those employee resource groups, and if they don't exist, talk to somebody in HR, talk to somebody higher up in the company to say what are our options for creating these groups, because I really think that individuals have a lot of power. But when you can kind of find a group of other people who can be sponsors and mentors and advocates, I think you get even stronger. So that would kind of be my first recommendation there is just figure out like what's available to you currently and what would you like to see, and then like what are the steps for making that happen. And I would hope that any company would welcome those questions at this point. If you find yourself in an organization that doesn't want to move that way, I would maybe just think about whether that's the right organization for you. But yeah, and then other than that, I think there are a lot of great resources. Like I know the newsletter that you put out, and a lot of other organizations like Level puts out a newsletter. There's just really great information on how other people have done it, talking about specific challenges that minorities have faced in the workplace, and whether it's generational or racial or sexual orientation or whatever it is. I think that there's always someone out there who can at least relate to what you're going through, and seeing if you can kind of connect with them on some level or learn from their story is also a good place to start.
Yeah, yeah, I like meet your organization where they're at, right? Assume positive intent. Assume that they are
Mm-hmm.
interested in this, and even if, like you said, they're on the journey and they're not quite there yet, like maybe you could be a champion to help support.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could talk to senior leaders that have influential power to get them involved. Maybe you could
Mm-hmm.
start the next employee resource group, to your point. So just because they're not doing it yet, I'm a firm believer it's never too late to start. I mean, I think at some point it
Right.
will be too late. There is a limited amount of runway here before you're just irrelevant at some point.
Right.
But we do have some time. And if you want to be a catalyst for change inside your organization, you can do that. And to your point, if you try a few times and you strike out, like maybe this isn't the right place for me,
Mm-hmm.
and putting real action. There's a lot of talk around performative allyship, being an ally that kind of sits on the sidelines isn't so cool, right? And I think we've all been burned by that
Mm-hmm.
person. We thought we're really going to, go to bat for us, like stick up for us in a difficult situation, and they didn't, And
Mm-hmm.
so being an active ally is really important. Setting that expectation with leadership too. I wonder, what other things are you seeing? Kind of trends, best practices of organizations that want to recruit and retain diverse talent.
I think one of the greatest kind of indicators for me is their willingness to look at the inclusion piece. Because to your point earlier, it is D and I. It's not D or I, and it's not just D. So the companies that are willing to say, okay, we recognize that while we may want to focus on diversity and getting more diverse talent in the door, we're also willing to look and figure out where there might be some gaps in our inclusion processes or in our retention. That to me is always a really good indicator of an organization that's doing the work. That's not just about, hey, we're going to hire X amount of minorities in this space and in this space, and we're going to check the box, and it doesn't really matter what happens after that because we put an offer letter out. So I think really bringing in that inclusion piece is very important, because you don't get the value of diversity if people aren't sticking around long enough to have an impact, or if they don't feel empowered to share their diverse experiences and thoughts and ideas. So for me, I would say just really, really focusing on that inclusion piece is super important and like a really good best practice. And I also think with just the different issues, social issues that are going on, taking a stance is really important. And then to your point, backing that up with action. How are you going to support the statement you made that says we support Black Lives Matter? What are you doing about that? Are you donating to any cause? Are you volunteering? What does that look like? And so I think being able to back that up with action is very important.
Yeah, there were so many stories last summer of people. Hey, we have a corporate statement that clearly looked like someone in PR or legal wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe we gave out some pens or some things to show Black Lives Matter or whatever it was. It was hilarious to hear these stories. And not that those things can't be important, but to your point, they have to be tied together holistically. They have to be demonstrated over time. There has to be consistent cadence of events, of programs, of communications, of activities, and give people the opportunity to kind of choose their own adventure through that. But culturally, this is something that we have an unwavering commitment to. And I think that's what really, to me, where I see the difference happening in organizations where they're willing to do that, just like they would any other cultural transformation. They would be willing to embed this into our inclusive culture. And so I'm curious, Chelsea, when you think about organizations that, the problem you solve for is, I can't find diverse talent, which is like my biggest pet peeve question. Like, so what? Like,
yeah. Are you looking?
Yeah, where are you looking? The same place? Maybe that's why.
Yeah.
I had a client that shared, so we only recruit at Ivy League schools right now. Like, maybe that's not inclusive. Yep. Bingo.
It's a good starting point. Yeah.
It's like, that's really where we're at. But, meet people where they're at. So I'm curious, Chelsea, if you've encountered clients like that before, and I'm sure we have listeners that can relate to this dilemma, why is that like a myth? Why is that untrue? And how do you help organizations do that?
Yeah. So I think part of the issue is, again, this is the way we've always done it. We've always posted our jobs on Monster or Indeed and LinkedIn, or we've gotten all of our employees from our referral network of people who look and think like us, who we went to school with or who we worked with, who are generally a very homogenous group. And so it's kind of getting away from that and saying like, okay, especially depending on the type of position you're recruiting for, where are you looking? And are those people the same people that use these job boards? Or like, maybe that's not accessible to certain people. Maybe they haven't had good luck with getting responses on those job boards. So are there other creative ways that we can look to find these people, whether it's partnering with boot camps that are doing some reskilling work. It can be connecting with local advocacy groups. I know like here in Columbus specifically, we have some really great groups. We've got Black Tech 614, Women in Analytics. We've got Zetabytes, which is LGBTQIA in tech. So talking to those groups and just figuring out like, where is your network searching for work, or how can we reach you? How can we do this differently? And I think the other thing is like, we also have to create what we're looking for? What are we doing to improve the retention rate of women in STEM, starting as early as middle school and high school, and making sure that they stay in it through college? Like, what are we doing to create these opportunities for people to even get skilled in these skill sets? So that is a big push for me on, like, if you don't see exactly what you want in the workforce, if you don't see the level of talent in a specific minority group that you want to really uplift, how can you fix that? How can you create those opportunities? And I think it's more work. It absolutely is. It's more work than just sending your neighbor a quick text and saying, like, hey, do you have anyone in your network who would fit this job? Or, just posting it on LinkedIn and just being really passive about it. So that's kind of a hurdle too, is just reassessing the way that we're even looking for talent.
Well, and diversity isn't easy. Otherwise, we'd already be doing it. Right?
Yeah.
So remind people, great benefits, a great business case on the other side, but of course you're not there yet. And of course you have to change behavior, and that's hard in the short term. And you're fighting that instant gratification of, I've got a position open. I just need a warm body.
Right.
And I've never had a client that said that to me that ever got what they wanted when they hired the employee, right? If your standards are that low that you just want somebody with a pulse, like, good luck. Like, that's kind of definitely a big risk to run. The second myth I want to ask you about, Chelsea, is the one I hear, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. We can't lower the standards for diverse talent. Dispel that one for us.
That one is one that is just so frustrating to me. Because, and I think you can see this, and I remember some study coming out about this a few years ago about, how essentially the SAT and ACT are really written for a specific demographic, for white people, typically middle class, from a specific background. It's written to make sense to them and for them to excel at. Does it mean that people from a different background or experience aren't as smart or can't succeed as well, whether it be in college or jobs? Like, no. But what is our rubric for it? How are we grading and assessing these people, and is it truly fair? That one is very frustrating for me. Are there ways that we can say, maybe you don't have the traditional experience that we're looking for, but you have the aptitude, or you have relevant experience, and I can see how this would transfer well. I don't think it's a matter of lowering standards. I think it's a matter of being open to different ways of doing things, different learning styles, different teaching styles, and things of that nature. And I think on the other side, for companies that don't want to accept that answer, my question is, okay, well, if you do really prioritize diversity and that's something you want, then in your mind, what are you willing to kind of give a little bit on? What are you willing to be flexible on so that you can get that diverse talent? So again, it kind of depends on the client. And I'm sure you've seen that too. You've got some who you can really be honest with and talk about, it's really not a lowering of standards. And you have some that you kind of have to work around and say, okay, what are we willing to flex on so that we can get this diverse talent in?
And simply just reviewing your job requirements list. Are those really requirements, or those aspirational? Because we know men and white people, 60% of the job requirements done, I'm applying, versus people in underrepresented groups are really going to be hard on themselves for a lot of reasons, a lot of stigmas associated with being the only one. So challenging, like, what's really a requirement here? And I like that. What are we willing to be flexible on? Because if we want to recruit different talent, perhaps we need a different approach that matches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, for certain jobs, obviously, if you're, hiring for a chemist or something, that's like very technical or very scientific, there are certain base requirements, right? But to your point, is this just a laundry list of like this perfect unicorn that just doesn't exist, and we're just going to find, the closest white person, the closest white male who can fill it? just reevaluating that process and saying, is this really getting us what we want? And is this really the only person who can do this job well?
Yep.
And I think in both cases, the answer will be no.
Those are really good thought questions. All right, last myth to bust around diversity recruiting. The other one I hear, Chelsea, is they're just not a good cultural fit. Why is that problematic?
So, culture fit is very problematic because it kind of perpetuates this idea of stagnation, right? Like, we want someone who fits into what we are already. And if we're just bringing in people who think exactly like us and who fit in with exactly what we're doing, how are we innovating? How are we going to have a competitive edge if we're just kind of, again, creating this very homogenous group that doesn't think outside the box or think any differently? So we at Level have really been trying to coach our clients around, let's look at a culture ad. Let's look at someone who understands. I think obviously you want somebody who is respectful, who aligns with your values, but who is also maybe willing to push the envelope a little bit on what you're doing currently and figure out, like, how can we improve this or think about it differently? Because you're never going to innovate if you get people who are just like, yes, I agree with you 100% on everything. Like, let's get to work.
Yeah. Fit is code for people like us. And I had a client recently, their feedback to me was, so we need to have objective criteria, not just subjective criteria, because I could see that fit thing coming up. And if I can't say, like, if I can't give specific feedback to the candidate of why they weren't a good fit, right? Because fit is kind of like this vague, like, it's kind of like me language.
Yeah.
And when they said that, like, objective criteria, that's something we need to do. Like, yes. And if someone says cultural fit in the interview process, challenge that. Well, what do you mean? Help me understand the qualifications they're not meeting here. What are the criteria? And so you can turn off that kind of affinity bias that we naturally all carry to want to be around people like us because we feel, safer. But like the innovation, the cultural change, the growth comes from having different perspectives at the table. So there's this rub. Again, the short term, it's a little painful, but long term, there's some beautiful things that happen. It's totally worth it.
Yeah, and I really like that kind of concept of objective criteria. Again, because we've seen some clients who are like, when we submit someone, they'll ask, "Can you share their social profiles?" Whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatever. And my question is kind of like, "Okay, that's interesting." And they're like, "Well, we're just really looking to make sure that these people aren't posting hateful things or anything that kind of goes against our goal for getting, a more diverse, inclusive, and, accepting and welcoming place." And I get that. And so that can be something that's part of your objective fit, is like, we're not really willing to compromise on being respectful, and being tolerant. But to your point, what of those can be subjective, or what of those don't have to be objective? Is it that you believe that code should all be written one way, or whatever it might be? That's is this truly important to our culture, and is this something that we can flex on to be more innovative?
Wow, that's a really good way to think about it. And because often when we look at the social profiles, right, we're like, we evaluate things based on what they look like, right? Is it like me?
Yeah.
Is it like people that work here already? You're going to get more of the same. And so you have to kind of challenge that and make it objective. So what are you looking for on the profile exactly, right? And what are the things we're non-negotiable on, like being respectful as a behavior, for example, versus just, it just doesn't feel right. Like that.
Yeah.
That's where I think the rub is. Oh, Chelsea, it's been so good to talk with you today. For our listeners that want to follow your work and connect with you, tell us how they can get in touch with Level and the work that y'all do.
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is probably the best place to kind of follow Level. So it's just Level D&I Solutions, with a little ampersand, D and I. And we're on the other social channels too. We do some posting on Instagram, not as active on Twitter or Facebook, but LinkedIn is a great place to follow what we're doing. And as the country hopefully starts to open back up, we're going to be hosting more events and trying to just really get back out there in the community. So would love for people to kind of follow that journey and figure out what we're doing and just join us in these conversations.
That's awesome, Chelsea. Well, thanks for being on the podcast and for sharing your amazing work with our listeners.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you listening to this episode. If you like this podcast, the best way you can be an ally is to write a review on iTunes, on Spotify, on Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Every review helps other allies find us. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together as allies.